And I want to introduce Patrick Regan to you now. We're staying with the broad angle, if you like, on spirituality and mental health. And we're moving to a more personal perspective, which Patrick Regan is going to bring to us. Patrick has an OBE for work with young people. He set up the charity Kitsugi Hope, which works to strive to make a difference to mental well-being and health. And he's now the director of a well-being charity called Brighter Days, which I think he will tell us about.
I know we're on. If anyone's got a gift of praying for technology, I think I need that. I think I really do. I sort of feel like it always beats me at the end of the day. Good morning, everyone. It is so lovely to see you and so lovely to be here. Such an honor and a privilege, actually. And just what a fantastic opening lecture. Thank you so much for sharing those insights with us. I've been asked to give a personal perspective on spiritual factors within mental health. And I recognize many of you. So if you've heard me speak before, apologies that you're going to hear me again. But hopefully we'll learn something together. But first of all, I did want to tell you about this book that I've just written called Brighter Days, 12 Steps to Strengthen Your Wellbeing. I was sitting in my study about 18 months ago. I've written 7 books. I've studied theology, and I was looking at all my books. And I'm an activist at heart. I want to reach people in communities. And I realize that I don't have one book that I would give to a non-Christian person. I haven't got one book that I would give to my mates at the school gates who are parents, because all my books are full of jargon, or they're very technical, which normally a layperson wouldn't understand. And so I set myself a challenge of writing something that hopefully would be a lot gentler, but included mental and emotional, spiritual and behavioral health, but did it in maybe a little bit more of a gentle way. And some of you know my story. The reason also I wanted to do this was 9 years ago, I had a breakdown which shook me. And when I had that, everyone was trying to give me a book to read, and I could even read a chapter, not alone, or a paragraph, not alone a book. And so what I wanted to do is to write it in really short stories, just practical tips, how to get to sleep if you can't sleep and your brain is just going round and round. What does anxiety really feel like without talking about flight or freeze, and just trying to make it really accessible. I did a lot of research, sent it to every Christian and every psychologist that I knew, and psychotherapists and doctors and experts, and they all inputted into it. And we just put it out into the world. And a head teacher rang me up and said, "I'll take 150 copies, please." And I was like, wow. And she said, "Yeah, we've had 3 attempted overdoses in year 11. So I'm going to buy a copy for every single year 11 pupil." And actually, the challenge isn't just the pupil's mental health, it's their parents' mental health. Because what happens is the kids go home and all the good work the school have done is undone within minutes sometimes. So we're going to write to all the parents and I'm going to ask, can you please read this book with your child and discuss it? And then can you come in and talk to all of Year 11's parents and all of Year 11? There's about 500 people there. A fantastic opportunity for me to talk about that. I was doing a talk in Westminster at a political think tank, as you do. And this woman came up to me and said, "Can I have 50 copies, please?" And I said, "That's a lot. Are you okay?" And she said, because it's unusual. And she said, "You know what? My 15-year-old son has just died by suicide. And I'm going to give him out at the funeral. Everyone who comes to the funeral is going to get an order service and a book." And I've literally been humbled by the stories that people have done. I've had people march up to me after talks and holding a book going, "That line there saved my life." And so we do 2 for 20 just because we don't want to make money particularly out of them. If anyone's ever written a book, you realize that no one makes money out of writing books. We just want to get them out into the world. Waterstones are taking them now, which is really encouraging as well. So I encourage you to do that. And then on the back of that, we've written a 4-week CPD course, which is accredited by CPD, that we're delivering online with the view of people training online with us and then delivering it into their practices, into their businesses, into their schools, into their communities. So hopefully that will be a good resource for you. Now, who here can relate? Oh, great, I've done the wrong thing already. That's really helpful, Patrick. There we go. Who here who can relate to this slide? Anyone? Oh, come on, you're meant to be people, some people of faith here. That is like, you're meant to be honest if you're people of faith. And I think this basically sums up my life. When I was a lot younger, I moved to London and I was a youth worker in a local church. And down the road from the church in a school, there was a stabbing in the school playground. And so the school phoned the church up and said, will you help us get the moral fibre of our school up? The vicar didn't really fancy it because he knew how rough it was, so sent me as a local youth worker to see what I could do. And I arrived in a school which was really different to the culture that I was brought up in. And in this one particular school, there were 65 mother tongue languages. It wasn't that the kids were thick or stupid. In fact, quite the opposite. They've had to deal with incredible adversity, incredibly articulate, some of them. It's just they didn't understand English. So I started helping with literacy and numeracy. But I started to realize there were some big issues going on in our community. I did a whole school assembly, and then when I did this whole school assembly, this lad came up to me afterwards, and he was wearing a bulletproof vest underneath his school uniform, like this. And I thought, is he doing it to impress me? Actually, he was not, because 6 weeks later, he was stabbed through the neck by a kid in year 11. And so I found 17 people to give me £25 a month, and I started a charity called XLP, wanting young people to excel in every aspect of their life. And I moved into a place called Peckham, just down the road from where, I don't know if you guys recognize this photograph. That was a little kid called Damalola Taylor, who was 10 years old. He lived just down the road from me. He was stabbed to death, broken bottle. He bled to death in a stairwell in Peckham. And he did this walk home from his school, which was exactly the same walk home that I would have to do from the railway station. And I remember just thinking, these issues in our community are crazy. And then I started working with the police and started working with businesses and started talking with healthcare providers. And some of the stats, you know, one of the ones that staggers me is that a borough commander, who I know incredibly well actually, he said, you're never 100 yards away from a domestic violence case in this country. It's the pandemic no one knows what to do about. It's the pandemic no one knows how to police. And even in rural communities, it's the same, but it's just different because the houses are slightly more apart. And I remember experiencing that, going into people's homes, seeing fist marks in the wall, dealing with young people and their families. I had one young girl, 15-year-old, who died by suicide in the school. It totally rocked the whole community. And of course, when like that happens, thousands of people are affected. Young people, mothers who'd lost their kids to knife crime, so many. And I started to struggle, to be honest, because I wanted to help. I wanted to make a difference as someone of faith. And I guess that I'm speaking to the choir because you are doing what you do, because you've probably got a similar passion and an energy, whatever sphere you're working in, to make a difference. But the challenge is I realized that I couldn't absorb everyone else's pain. Who remembers this chap? You're all of a certain age, that's great. And Roy Castle used to present a program called Record Breakers. But before he did that, he performed in pubs and clubs across the UK, and he played the trumpet. Roy Castle died of something called second-hand smoke. He'd never smoked a cigarette in his life. He died by inhaling other people's smoke. And the challenge was, I was very on my own, and I mean, XLP grew to be a huge charity in the end, but I was struggling to tell people what I was going through, because what I did is I played what you call top trumps with pain. Do you remember the game Top Trumps? Is I basically say, your pain's worse than my pain, so I'm not going to talk about my pain. So my sister is an ITU nurse, and during the pandemic, I struggled, like many people, but I did not say anything, because my sister was seeing things that no human being should ever have to see. But you see, in that situation, she doesn't win and I don't win. And that's often what we were doing. And it just came out of a good place. And then, again, I don't know if any of you have experienced this. I went through what I describe as the Tetris moment. Who remembers the game Tetris? A computer game where you're meant to get all these blocks in a straight line. And when you get them in a straight line, then hopefully the line disappears. But they come quicker and quicker and quicker and quicker. And eventually, you just can't carry on because they come so quick, it's game over. And sometimes, I don't know if it's just me, but things always seem to go wrong at once. And I was dealing with all this stuff in a work context, but then when it got to a personal context, my kids, my oldest daughter, Kezia, got a condition called HSP, which some doctors here would be aware of. The doctor I went to with my daughter's condition didn't know what it was, so started Googling it, which didn't really fill me with confidence, I have to say. And but she had it, and she had it bad for a while. And it's a scary condition because you think it's like meningitis, and if she runs a temperature sick, you've got to rush her into hospital. And we did that twice. She's had it twice now. My other daughter, Abby, got a condition called nystagmus, which again, some of you be familiar with, which is not the end of the world, but it's trying to find an underlying cause. Is there an underlying cause? She has 40% vision. Her eyes flicker all the time. With autism and ADHD, and it was all happening. My dad got cancer. He was meant to go in hospital for a week. He was in hospital for 8 weeks, 9 weeks. He had 4 different operations. He lost 3 stone of weight. And again, every day I used to pray, please let this be the day that my dad is better. He survived. He's been through 5 cancer journeys himself. And then I had a pain in my knee. And I thought, I better just get it sorted out. And I went to the hospital, and I thought it's going to be a little keyhole surgery, And the consultant said to me, I'm very sorry, sir, but you need to have major limb reconstruction surgery. And I was like, that sounds a little bit frightening. What's that? And it says, well, we need to break both your legs in 3 places. And we need to put an external frame around your leg. So you're going to have pins going through one side of your leg, out the other side of the leg. Have you seen these massive frames? And each leg, it will be on 6 to 18 months, depending on how well it goes, how many infections you might get. And you need to adjust it every day. Your wife does. And I was like, wow, that's quite a lot to take in. And he said, it's such a big operation. I'll let you decide when you want to have it. And I was like, thanks ever so much. It's like waiting for a car accident to happen. Something really bad's going to happen, and you get to decide when it is. And because I had to do it separately as well. And at that point, I really started to struggle, and my mental health started to spiral out of control. But I went and I had to have the operation. Here is a picture of my leg and the inside of my leg, which is a little bit weird. Some people are like, how on earth did your kids cope? Well, I don't know if you could see, that's Diane cleaning my leg. She became my carer for 6 months. Here's Daniel. I don't know if you can see that. He turned it into a space station. So Han Solo and Luke Skywalker are at the front there, and Darth Vader's in the middle, just in case you're wondering. And then we had Christmas, which was lovely. And then just before I went for my second operation, Abigail broke her leg. And so here we are, just about to have a Zimmer frame race down the end of the garden. And my son, and this is quite an old photograph now, every time I show his photograph, he always likes to tell people, he won the race. I was like, you're the only one without a broken leg, son. And, but it was tough. It was really, really tough. And if I'm really honest with you, and I need to be honest with you today, is I've always struggled with mental health, poor mental health, always. And when you go through something traumatic, I think what happens is it acts as rocket fuel to what you were struggling with anyway. And suddenly you start feeling like I'm falling. And then the other thing that I've noticed, particularly if I can be as bold to say, within the faith community, is because it's full of very passionate individuals. And sometimes I think the culture around workers isn't always a very healthy one. I define culture as the way we do things around here. And I have had to deal with so many clergy who are either burnt out, worn out, who are on the edge the whole time. And I think what happens is we do this. So if you take, my phone works as well on 10% as it does 100%. Is that true? Some of you are looking at me as if this is a trick question. It's true. There's nothing this phone can't do on 10% that it can do at 100%. Nothing. So what's the difference? It just doesn't last very long. So what we do is we work really, really hard. We get really passionate about what we're doing. And then because we're quite self-aware people, we go, oh, I'm a bit worn out now. I'm going to have to take a few days off. And so we plug in again and we get up to about 30% and we're like, oh, I'm good to go. And then that goes on for years for some people. And then eventually we just crash because it's not sustainable. And that's the challenge. I started to spiral out of control. And yet the challenge was, I don't think sometimes we're really honest about how we're feeling within the Christian sector, within the faith sector. And my show reel looked pretty good. Everything on Facebook was going well. Here we had a visit from the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, now the Prince and Princess of Wales, twice to my charity within a year. They've never gone to a charity twice in a year and came for nearly half a day. This is Catherine. I'm sitting next to my wife. My wife's the one in black, in case you're wondering. And there was quite an amusing story, actually. Just before this photograph was taken, Catherine turned to Diane and went, do you like my dress? I'm not really sure what you meant to do when the future Queen of England says, do you like my dress? You can't go, it's horrible. So he went, it's a really lovely dress, Your Royal Highness. And she went, oh, that's good, because this morning, William says I look like a tablecloth. So he's got a point. But you know, these photos, they literally went around the world. It was in OK Magazine, Hello Magazine, BBC News. It was all over the place. And then, of course, I got asked by various prime ministers to advise them on all sorts of social justice issues. I have to say some of them were more annoying than others. But they would ring you up before question time saying, can you tell me what to say about this particular issue? Or when they're writing in a newspaper or something. But the reality is the show reel looked great, but I felt like I was just falling. I got an OBE from the Queen. I spoke in front of Archbishop Desmond Tutu. I hope all the catching these names as they drop here. And the show reel looked great, but this was the reality. This was the reality. And you know, I don't know if you've been on a roller coaster, but when you go down, your stomach falls and you go, it'll be all right, we'll go up again in a minute. When I was in that situation, I'm going down and I'm waiting for the up bit, but it's not happening. And I feel like I'm trying to grab something, to take hold of something that will helpfully get me up, but I can't do it. And then this was the challenge for me, is I would go to my faith community and I would say, I'm struggling. And it was really interesting. There were sort of 4 or 5 key things that I want to bring to your attention, spiritual factors when dealing with mental health. And 4 key things that people used to say to me quite regularly. A couple of years ago, I did an academic, we commissioned FIOS, the academic think tank, to do some research for us on the back of COVID, coming out of COVID, is what was mental health attitudes like in the church. And it was really interesting that as I read the report that I commissioned, that actually the report reflected exactly my experience. I mean, the report had 3 interesting factors. One is 90% of church leaders said they hadn't had training in mental health. Bible colleges and faith communities sometimes miss that. Secondly, that a lot of churches didn't have a position on mental health, about 50%, in fact, which if you're sitting there in the congregation doesn't really help if you're struggling with mental health because it's never talked about, it's never preached about. And thirdly, and this is where chaplaincy is so brilliant, where people are doing well is when people have learned to be a gentle presence in people's lives. If there is never a better phrase to describe what you guys do, it's that. Gentle presence, the walking alongside. But the things that they said that we're really struggling with were what they called negative lay theologies. And the first one that was said to me is, Patrick, you just need to have more faith. And I don't know if you've ever heard that before. And I was trying my best. And I felt like a failure because I couldn't do it. And I just couldn't muster up enough faith. And that somehow And the challenge is, there's that famous saying, isn't it? You can do anything by taking a Bible verse out of context. We take verses out of context, like Philippians 4, verse 6, do not be anxious about anything. We rip it out of any context, and then we make people feel really guilty about it. And that lack of faith is so damaging to so many people. I remember someone once saying to Mother Teresa, they went up to Mother Teresa and said, would you pray for me? And she was like, yeah, I'll pray for you. What would you like prayer for? And he said, I would like prayer for clarity. Who's ever asked for prayer for clarity before? And I was like, no, I'm not praying for that. I was like, well, you always seem to have clarity, Mother Teresa. And she went, I've never had clarity about anything. All I've ever had is trust. So I pray that you will be able to trust. And the second one was selfishness. The belief that mental illness of itself is inherently sinful, given the belief that it's rooted in selfishness. Again, I've had the opposite experience of people who are struggling with their mental health. When I was writing Brighter Days, I wanted to try and find a definition of anxiety, which wasn't so technical and medical. I know all those things, and I'm surrounded by people who are brilliant at those sort of things, are important. But I wanted to find something that I just felt was a little bit kinder in its approach. And I found this one, which was by a lady called Kirsty Corlin, that says, anxiety sometimes is caring too much. I really love that, actually. It's caring too much. And I know from people that I've dealt with anxiety, sometimes incredible empathy, incredible kindness, incredible sensitivity, but a bit like a fire alarm that's going off. When you fry the bacon, it's going off and you're flapping the tea towel underneath it to stop it. It's annoying. It's annoying for everyone, but actually it has a function. It's important as well. And trying to learn how we work with people who struggle. Another one was personal sin. And again, as if like we're being punished somehow. And I remember people said to me, is there anything you need to repent of? And to be honest, I repented of every sin that I've ever thought of, and I even made some up just to be sure. Because I just didn't want to be going through this horrible, horrible feeling. And then there's this other one where God will not give you more than you can handle. That's quite a quote. Have you ever heard that one? It's actually misquoting a verse in Corinthians in the New Testament. God will not give you more than you handle. And as if like God is this sort of weird character who will just watch you go to breaking point. And then the last one was around spiritual warfare. And again, just really understanding that there is a sense of, I'm not trying to throw the baby out of the bathwater, but actually when it came to demons and things like this, again, it often stems from misreading biblical texts. And often in Christian self-help literature, demonic forces and spiritual warfare are often cited often more than any source of depression. And it's important that we recognize the reality of the spiritual realm, but reject the idea that mental illness is always a result of demons. We would never jump to the same conclusion when it comes to physical illness. And my very good friend, Will van der Haar, and Dr. Rob Waller, who some of you be aware of, he's a psychiatrist, they wrote this. You cannot medicate demons. So if you're a person who responds to antipsychotic medication, there's an issue, obviously, that's neuropsychological and not spiritual. We're typically cautious about changing the meaning of Scripture, apart from when Jesus heals a person with demonic oppression. There, we seem more than happy to say that that was actually mental illness. I came to the conclusion that healing and cure are two really different things. So every day I'm healing, every day. And the key for me was to realize that this sense of gentle presence, God's gentle presence, people start to heal the moment they feel heard, says Cheryl Richardson. Professor Dan Silgel uses this brilliant little term called feeling felt. You may have heard of that, which describes what happens in our minds when we share stories that we're fully present to one another. And so I started to try and to recover and to look at what would help me in my recovery. And I guess there were 4 key things, and I'm not going to go through them all because I just don't have time, but come from a psychologist called Susan David. Courage, curiosity, and courage, curiosity, compassion, and connection. I added the word connection. She didn't have that word because I actually think, like has already been said, we're born for relationship. We're born to be connected with one another. And actually, spirituality, about that connection with the divine, that sense of purpose, that prayer, that feeling that God is there, is massive for people who are struggling with their mental health. I got to know a guy called Terry Waite. Anyone remember Terry Waite? Terry Waite was held captive in Lebanon for 5 years. And I wrote to him and I said, would you mind endorsing my book? And I don't know how this happened, but we got on really, really well. And we ended up going on tour together across the UK. And I spoke to him about his experience. And he wrote this, which I thought was fascinating. He said this. He'd been working as part of the Archbishop Canterbury's envoy. He spent 1,460 days in solitary confinement and wasn't released for almost another year. The conditions he describes were horrific, held in a cell, chained to a wall, sleeping on the floor. He had no natural light, no companionship, nothing to read, watch, or listen to dull the agonizing passage of time. It is impossible to imagine the anguish of such conditions. Terry said that one day he was told he had 5 hours to live. His captors allowed him to write one letter to his loved ones and say the Lord's Prayer. They then held a gun to his head. Believing he was seconds from death, having risked his life to help other people, he said, I felt alone and isolated. I never felt what some people claim to feel, the close presence of God. That doesn't mean to say I lost faith, because faith is not dependent on feeling. Feeling can be occasioned by illness and all sorts of things, but it's not a reliable guide to whether you have faith or not. But I said to my captors, you have the power to break my mind. So you have the power to break my body by beating me. You have the power to bend my mind by interrogating me. But my soul is not yours to possess. My soul is not yours to possess. And I just wanted to encourage you guys, is that you are called to be a gentle presence, to walk alongside, to show compassion. But a key, as we do that, the thing that I needed to learn is that I also needed to show compassion to myself. Let me ask you a question. Who is your biggest critic in life? A lot of people say their wives at this point, by the way. But it's you, right? You wouldn't dare talk to someone else the way you talk to yourself. And I remember my therapist saying to me, Patrick, how do you think about, how are you like at self-compassion? And I was like, to be honest, I'm a bloke. I don't do baths and I don't do candles. And she just rolled her eyes at me, and went, you totally misunderstood what self-compassion is. Because self-compassion, I've got so much content. I'm just going to rattle through this. This is great content that you're all missing, by the way. Self-compassion is not self-indulgence. It's not that sense of let's just extra glass of wine, extra cake just to take the edge off. It's not that. Most importantly, actually, self-compassion is not self-pity. It's not all about you. People make a drama out of everything sometimes. Self-compassion isn't self-esteem. And that is a really big, and there's been so much research done about this recently. Self-esteem is really important. It often comes from outside influences, external values, what people think about you. In fact, 25 years ago, a lot of lectures like this would be talking about self-esteem. Put a load of social media onto that. You can, there's some research that talks about it's become quite narcissistic. And it's very, very difficult because it deals with the external, whereas self-compassion deals with the internal. So whatever the result is you can show yourself some self-compassion. And I think that is so, so important. The other big thing I'd probably just want to say really quickly, actually, let's go back to this slide, is empathy and self-compassion are very different. I've just been studying with a group in the States called the Center of Compassionate Leadership. And one of the things that they are very keen on through all the research that they've done, which has been extensive, is they look at compassion as being awareness, connection, empathy, and action. 4 points to compassion. And that empathy is very much a part of compassion. And so often, Brené Brown's done some good work on this, hasn't she? Where she says that we have to get rid of the myth that empathy is standing in someone else's shoes. That's how a lot of people think of empathy. You can't stand in someone else's shoes. You've got different DNA, different story. And she says maybe empathy is believing them when they describe what it's like to be in their shoes. And get in touch with the feeling that you've been through. So if you've been lonely, I've been lonely. But I'm sure that your sense of loneliness and my sense of loneliness were quite different. But I can get in touch with that feeling of loneliness. But it's not exactly the same. But then the interesting of the research is that people that then stay in empathetic distress often burn out because it works on the pain receptors in your brain. Whereas compassion works on the reward receptors in your brain. It's quite genius that kindness is actually the best thing that you can do for your mental health and the best thing that you can do for someone else's mental health. Whoever designed that is really, really clever. It's genius. It's true, isn't it? And that's the key, is we've got to be more compassionate to one another. You've got to be more compassionate to yourself. And so I hope that you would be able to be that person when it's... Yeah, I'll finish by telling a story. Quite a few years ago now, some of you will know, because I know that you're part of the Kintsugi network, but I started a charity called Kintsugi Hope. Kintsugi is a Japanese word that means golden joinery. So if you break an object, we tend to mend it with super glue. We hide the cracks, we pretend it's not broken. What they do in Japan is they put a gold powder in the glue. So instead of hiding the cracks, they make a feature of the cracks. So arguably the object becomes more beautiful for being broken. It certainly becomes more unique. And I think it's a beautiful way of looking at beauty coming out of brokenness. And I've dealt with some of the most broken people, and I've used that metaphor so many times. And I think in chaplaincy, you have an amazing role where you come and you be that gentle presence. You come and walk alongside people. You know, I love the biblical story of Jesus on the road to Emmaus. I always think that's an incredible story because the day after Jesus' resurrection, if a marketing person would have come up to Jesus, you would have expected them to go, could we do a sort of Sermon of the Mount gig or feeding of the 5,000 gig? Get the word out. But actually, the day after the resurrection, walking alongside two heartbroken people who are probably a bit disillusioned, confused, anxious. And if you notice about that journey, he didn't just jump in and go, guys, I know you're upset, but here I am. Don't need to have this conversation anymore. Never said that, did he? He then, when they stopped talking, what did he do? He started telling a bigger story. The story right throughout the Old Testament of the prophets and all those sort of things. He just walked alongside. They get to Emmaus, and I don't know how I think about this theologically. I've always been a bit puzzled by it. But then he was going to go on. The big reveal hadn't happened. They said, stay for some food. And then brokenness revealed who he was. Journeying alongside people. When I first met Archbishop Desmond Tutu many years ago now, I was quite excited about meeting him because I had sort of met so many politicians, normally a week before the election, and actually I'm not that fussed about that, but I really was interested in meeting this man. And the problem was that he was coming at 10 o'clock during the day, and he wanted to talk to some of our young people that I was working with. And the problem is at 10 o'clock in the morning, most of my young people are either in bed or in school. So I was like, this is going to be a bit embarrassing. We had this big mobile bus units that we took onto estates. And I was like, this is going to be really embarrassing. There's going to be no one there. So I sent all my youth workers, get round the estate and say, Desmond Tutu's coming. And so they went round the estate and they went, you've got to come to the XLP bus, Desmond Tutu's coming. And they were like, who? I was like, Desmond Tutu. And they're like, how old's he? And I was like, it doesn't matter how old he is, just come to the bus. And they were like, I never heard of him. So I was like, have you heard of Nelson Mandela? And they were like, yeah, of course I've heard of Nelson Mandela. He's the next best thing. He's got bling and everything. You're going to love him. And in the end, they all came more out of respect for knowing XLP than knowing who Desmond Tutu was. And they were all there waiting on our bus. Desmond Tutu was coming with Mary Robertson, who was the former president of Ireland and Human Rights Commissioner in the UN. We didn't bother explaining who she was. And they were all there. And they got off he got off the bus. And you know how lovely old people sometimes grab your hand and then don't let go for ages. Have you ever experienced this? So I'm standing there. He grabs my hand and he doesn't let go. So we walk through this fairly rough estate, hand in hand. I'm sort of looking around me, feeling a little bit. The guys on the bus, they're falling about laughing at this point. They think this is the funniest thing they've ever seen. I'm obviously quite embarrassed. We get on the bus, and then I'm like, go on, Desmond, sock it to them. And he's like, I'm just here to listen. I went, just here to listen? No, that's rubbish. Just tell them about Nelson Mandela. Sock it to them. And he said, I'm just here to listen. And he listened. We were there for about an hour, listening how it's like to see your stepdad beat up your mum. And he calls you your dad, but you don't feel he's your dad because you've had so many stepdads, guesting fathers in the last 6 months. To listen as they talk about the trauma of seeing someone stabbed and never being offered counselling, or thinking that you're never going to get a job, or thinking that your prospects in life, because you have a certain postcode on your CV, means that you will not achieve the same. And then he turned to them and he said this, what you guys need to know is your past doesn't have to define your future. And then me and Desmond, as you do, we had to go and speak at a conference together. I did my little talk. He sat behind me and heckled me the whole way through. And then he stood up and he said this. There were moments visiting XLP, you were being tugged on your heartstrings. You were very close to tears, looking at these young people who are going down a cul-de-sac. But then they realized the incredible potential they had when given the chance to blossom. Each one of these kids is a masterpiece. God doesn't create rubbish. Each one of us is special to God. Your name is engraved on his hands. Some of us look like accidents. You might want to have a little look round now. I don't know, that might. But the most important thing that you can do is just to remind people that they're special to God. As he was leaving the bus, he grabbed one of these kids' hands. And this kid, he'd smoking so much weed that morning. He was like all over the place. And he looked at him and he went, I'll tell you what you are. You are a VSP. Very special person. You're made in the image of God. You have the potential to change this world. And this kid just looked at him. I thought he was going to kick off. And it wasn't one of those amazing stories. He suddenly got a job. He did get his hair cut. He did stop smoking weed for 2 days. He went around the estate going, Desmond Tutu spoke to me. But he's never forgotten that. As he was leaving, we were just the two of us on our own. And Desmond turned to me and he said something. And I've said this story a few times over the years. And when I first started telling this story, I lied about what Desmond Tutu said. Everyone's like, I knew we shouldn't have invited him. Where's the committee? Dodgy speaker. I said, I remember I spoke in front of 5,000 people at Spring Harvest, and I said that Desmond Tutu said, XLP, make God smile, which is a charity that I worked for, right? Because it's always about the charity. Desmond Tutu turned to me and went, Patrick, you make God smile. But I couldn't hack that. And I think one of the things I wanted to leave you with is whatever faith background you're from, whatever you believe, you make God smile. And you have that ability to be that gentle presence. You have that ability to come alongside people. We have got to get our theology straight. We've got to get the spiritual factors that just are so unhelpful. And my personal experience is I have more questions than answers, but I'm okay with that. There's a Chinese proverb that says it's better to light a candle than curse the darkness. And that's why Brighter Days is so important to me, because I think we just got to keep going and keep walking alongside. Thank you so much for listening so beautifully.